you're a plaintiff in the matter and you have a case against your spiritual poverty, then there's really nothing you can do today. But if indeed you are a defendant, and your lack of spiritual wealth is entirely your fault, and you can do something about it, that you can gain access to a much deeper, much more sincere, much more profitable walk with God, then I'd want to know how to do it, wouldn't you? I'd want to be about that. And so before you choose the side of the courtroom, before you decide whether or not you're a hammer or a nail today, let's take a look at this account and see what we can gain from it. And by looking at this account, we're going to look at three different things. We're going to look at the tears of a king, we're going to look at the deployment of some weapons, and we're going to look at a prophet's anger. The first thing is that we're going to look at are the king's tears. Look at me again at verse 14. It says, when Elisha became sick with the illness of which he was going to die, on which he was to die, Joash, the king of Israel, came down to him and wept over him and said, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. Well, what does the weeping of a king tell us about what he fears? Now, kings are not wont to be crying all the time. And these are not tears, these are tears of desperation a lot. You know, when he hears that Elisha is dying, the king leaves his palace and runs to the bed of Elisha. And the picture here is that he throws himself, drapes himself over Elisha and is weeping. Okay, he's sobbing, crying over this man. Now, what does his crying tell us about what he's afraid of? Well, what his tears tell us is that for Joash, the king of Israel, what he's most afraid of is his ignorance of God. What Elisha is, and Elisha was a person who knew God. Joash understood, as the king of Israel, that this whole enterprise of the nation of Israel, the whole matter, its whole construction and its upkeep and everything depended upon God. God is the engine of Israel. And Joash, whether he likes it or not, he understands that his success as a king and the greater success of the people, the security of the people, and Israel was always under attack by a foe from the north, the south, and the east. They were always under attack. And Joash understood that it was God who was the sole protector. And he also understood that he had a great blessing in the person of Elisha. Because if he needed to know what to do as far as what tactic to take, whether to attack, whether to be afraid, what he needed to do, all he needed to do was take the trip to Elisha and say, Elisha, I need to know from God. And Elisha would go to God and tell him. But what is making Joash so worried and so afraid here is that when Elisha dies, in essence, God dies for Joash because Joash doesn't know him. And Elisha is his only access to the very person who is responsible for his security and his protection and his guidance. And if Elisha dies, what then is Joash going to do? He's without access to the person of God, who is most important to him. And so, he's crying because, in essence, he doesn't know God. Now, it might be capable, it might be right to say that Joash should have come crying to Elisha at his coronation instead of at Elisha's deathbed, but that doesn't matter. He's coming crying now. And just to give you some, a little bit of and incidentally, look at what he calls him. He does him a great honor by calling him his father, for one thing. He says, my father, my father. But then he says to Elisha, Elisha, you are the very chariots of Israel and their horsemen. What he's saying to Elisha is that you are the very power of Israel. You are our might. Not you necessarily, but the access that you have to God is what makes this country strong. You are the chariots of Israel. You are its horsemen. Well, that's not the first time that phrase was used in Scripture. Let's look at when it was first used. Let's look back at 2 Kings, because Elisha was the first person to use it. Let's look at how Elisha came to be powerful. Look back at 2 Kings, same book, chapter 2, and let's look at verse 1. And I'll read a good bit of this account. Elisha was the disciple, if you want to use that word, of Elijah, who was a very great prophet of God that we have heard about. And Elijah, who was a prophet, was ministering. And Elisha was a young man. The story we have here with Joash is 45 years after what we're about to read. So what we're going to read here in chapter 2 happened 45 years earlier, when Elisha first became a prophet. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1 reads like this. And it came about when the Lord was about to take up Elijah by a whirlwind to heaven, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. Then the sons of the prophets who were at Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Hey, do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Be still." And Elijah said to him, "Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. And the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho approached Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Be still." Then Elijah said to him, "Please, stay here, for the Lord has sent me over to the Jordan." And he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. Now 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood opposite them at a distance, while the two of them stood by the Jordan. And Elijah took his mantle and folded it together and struck the waters, and they were divided here and there, so that the two of them crossed over on dry ground. Now it came about when they had crossed over that Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please, let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." And he said, "You've asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if not, it shall not be so." Then it came about, as they were going along and talking, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, which separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind to heaven. And Elisha saw it and cried out, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." And he saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. He also took up the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and returned and stood by the bank of the Jordan. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and struck the waters, and said, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And when he had also struck the waters, they were divided here and there, and Elisha crossed over. That's a good account. It's very telling. Elisha's blessing did not come as a result of anything other than his still, persistent, and open-handed belief. Elisha would not have been by Elijah's side when he was translated, when he was taken up in that whirlwind, if Elisha had agreed to stay either in Bethel or in Jericho. But every time that Elijah said, "Hey, please stay here, Elisha. I need to go to Bethel. I need to go to Jericho. I need to go to the Jordan River." Every time, what was Elisha's response? "Listen, as the Lord lives, as you live, I am not going to leave you." He refused to leave. He understood as well that he was going away that day. But he was still. He said to those prophets, "Be still. I understand." He was persistent. And he had an open-handed belief. And when Elijah said, finally, "All right, I'm about to leave. What do you want?" He said, "I want double what you have." Now listen, it's clear here that what's different between Joash and Elisha, and what's good about Joash is that he does come and ask, and he does come crying at the end. But what's important to see about Elisha was that he is not some special person who was granted this power by virtue of him being special. He is granted this power because he refuses to have nothing other than it. Okay? He pursued it. He wanted it for himself. He wanted it for the people. And he got it because he was persistent. Because he practically begged. He was great. Elisha was great because he asked to be great. He asked and he received. He sought and he found. And I think that's the first thing you need to note here, is that when you look at the tears of the king, he understands that what's perilous about his position is that he doesn't know God.